How does jumping the fence and getting caught at a local racetrack lead to making sandwiches for corner workers, which leads to leading SEMA? Well, we're going to throw the green flag on this episode and find out. Well, as I mentioned, we have Mike here in the Atomic Autosports studio. Lucky enough that he took some time out of his busy day to talk to us about motorsports, racing, SEMA, PRI, and everything that our awesome industry has. Mike, thanks for being here.
I'm really glad to be here. This is fun. I love to talk racing. Some of my podcasts, to be honest, can be a little boring, but anytime I can hang with you guys, it's going to be a lot of fun, I can tell.
Well, all the other podcasts I listened to that you were on, you were laughing and having a good time. So it was good stuff. So many of my guests, we're going to jump right into it. Many of my guests got involved in cars and racing because of a family member. And you are no different. It was your uncle who was a Ferrari mechanic, right? Who got you into cars. How did all of that evolve?
Yeah, actually, it was my brother-in-law. So I have a sister that's older than, 10 years older than me. And she married a guy named Dino DeGuardi, who was a big SCCA racer out here in Southern California. He and his brother Nick were pretty well known around Riverside and Willow Springs and those sort of tracks. And as a young kid, as a 7-year-old, he would take me to the races. I knew I had an interest in cars there. I was already starting to build model cars and those sorts of things. But getting out to those racetracks and having the chance to just hang out there and the cars going by, it was just in my blood from those days. And then he had a sports car center in Glendale, and he'd let me come over and change oil and hang out all day with him and just smell cars all day long. So from early on, and I was more in that sports car world than I was. A lot of guys my age were into muscle cars. Mm-hmm. I was probably the odd duck out, hanging around at Alfa Romeos and different import cars, but that was my love. So it was really cool.
Yeah, was it because of him that you went to Auto Shop then?
Yeah, it was a few things. I think they say it takes a village to raise a kid, and mm-hmm. I had some neighbors on the street, some dads on the street. My dad was a bartender. My mom was an opera singer, so I didn't get any car culture from them. But
no,
and even in those days, there were kind of the older kids on the street were coming back from Vietnam and had a few bucks in their pockets. So, a 63 Corvette would run down the street, or a 65 Mustang, or a 69 Chevelle would run down the street, and I'd run out to the curb to just listen to them go down the street. And then those dads of those sons would be working on those cars. So I would hang out with them as well. And then one of the neighbors actually built a shop behind his house, and I hung out there the whole time.
Oh, how fun. Did you ever think that, getting greasy, working on cars, going to shop class in high school, you'd eventually be leading the SEMA organization?
Had no idea. I had no idea 8 years ago that I'd be, leading SEMA. And in fact, my wife even asked me once, she said, would you ever want to run SEMA? And I said, I don't think so. Not in my life. I said, it's a lot of hard work. Yeah. And
here we are.
But what an honor, what a joy, what an honor, and the opportunity. I pinch myself every single day. I live it, I breathe it. I still feel like I'm a student of it, and it's just again, a lot of hard work, but I feel like I can make a difference. I feel like we can preserve our sport and preserve what we love, and I work a lot in legislation as well as just other things. It's all the things that SEMA is.
Yeah, and I do want to do some deep dives into SEMA, PRI, and kind of what the landscape is too on the legislative side. When you were in your teenage years, you were telling me before we hit the record button, you would make sandwiches to take to the racetrack just so you get closer to the racing action. How many sandwiches were you making? How were you getting to the track? Because I don't think you weren't even 16 yet.
So there was a lady named, it was kind of a funny story, but there was a lady named Lucille Cavanaugh that would make the sandwiches for the course workers at Riverside Raceway. And as a kid, I got to go to Ontario Speedway for its first race. And Evel Knievel was there to jump the cars. So while he was jumping the cars, I jumped the fence to get in the pits. And Lucille caught me. And we got to be, first she kind of yelled at me, and then she realized my passion. And she's like, well, why don't you come out and make sandwiches with me at the racetracks, and I'll get you a pit pass. And when we're done making sandwiches in the morning, you can just hang out at the racetrack. So, that was the beginning. And then in auto shop, I had in high school, I took vocational auto shop. And my senior year, it was 2 years of two sessions of auto shop, so it was 2 hours long. And a prominent SEMA member came in to my auto shop and said, we're going to give a $200 automotive scholarship to the number one person in this class at the end of the year. And I worked hard, and I wasn't great at all the other grades. I wasn't great in, government and all those other things that I get to do today. But I was pretty good at auto shop, and I was pretty good at turning a wrench. And again, I'd kind of lived and breathed cars by that point. Anyway, I won that scholarship, and the guy that gave it to me was Mickey Thompson.
Oh my goodness.
So he had gone to my high school, and he was the one that presented it to me. And
wow.
So, mentors like that, again, that's that village, that just the fathers on my street, my brother-in-law, Lucille, all those sort of people, Mickey Thompson, I got to be surrounded about it, here in Southern California. So, from the time I had a driver's license, I would go to SCCA races on the weekend. Any sort of race I could get to in Southern California, I would get to.
Yeah. And something I've called this out in some other episodes, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because I do want to talk about the racing stuff, but you've had opportunities to say yes. You said yes, and it moved you down your journey, whether it be a motorsports journey, a car journey in your case. If Lucille hadn't caught you and you didn't say, sure, I'll come and make some sandwiches, you may not have had the opportunity to hang out at the track that much, and Who knows where we'd be today.
No, for sure. It's those steps along the way. I feel again blessed. I kind of feel that we all have kind of God-given talents as well, and I was able to have that talent, and I was able to feed it, and but it also means that, especially as a kid, you take a bit of risk, you take a bit of the ability to take up those opportunities and to understand them, and even just making sandwiches, even be that grunt worker. That got you that step, right? And so many people today want to start at the top. And, you got to learn to do whatever it takes to kind of make that journey up your way. Out of high school, I went to work at a Datsun dealership as the delivery driver, and eventually worked myself up to the parts counter and parts manager and those sorts of things. But you got to put in that effort.
Yeah, and I think I'm a big fan of youth in our industry, and so I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but I think somewhere along the lines, the generations have kind of lost that there is a ladder. There is a put your work in. You're going to have the broom in your hand. You and I have a lot of similarities. We're going to talk about Datsuns. Let's talk about the dealership for a minute. My first automotive job was I was hired as a porter at a Alfa, Eagle, Jeep, Plymouth, Chrysler dealership.
No way.
We didn't sell many Eagles back then, but so I was hired to wash cars. I didn't wash a car for about the first week because the parts manager grabbed me, the service manager grabbed me. I was jumping in trying to smash trash inside of a dumpster. But where it took me and what I learned, I look back on those opportunities and I said, I'm so glad I just stuck around and made the most of that. And so where I was going with that is if today's youth can kind of grasp that and understand that okay, I'm not going to be doing this forever, but these are the building blocks I need for success. And that's been part of your journey.
Right, for sure. And, we do here at SEMA hire a lot of people right out of college, but that is part of the journey I tell them about. And, it really is an opportunity to come to SEMA and to work in this industry and to be part of it. And we don't get that many openings here because people like to come here and stay. But when there is that opening, we're fortunate to be able to try to get some really good young people coming straight out of college, or especially in our SEMA garage where we've got engineering track opportunities. And we've been really, I'll say lucky at it, but we've got some incredible staff here that are willing to do that journey and willing to, roll up their sleeves and get to work and learn along the way. So, but I'm the same way. I'm a big proponent of that. We do a lot of work with high school and college students. I actually still do that scholarship today after Mickey died. I took that scholarship program over and still work with kids in auto shops, and we have a lot of college engineering students that come here to the garage every year. So I'm a big believer in that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So was it the Datsun dealership that sort of gave you that initial interest in Datsun cars?
No, I actually had it before, in high school. So when that 240Z came out and that 510 and all that, those were in my high school years. And, I went to the Datsun dealership and got the parts manual, the parts book, and the brochures on all those cars, and just dreamed about them. And those were the days of Mac Tilton and Bob Sharp and, all that, John Morton, all the BRA stuff, and just followed that. And it was, the birth of the Japanese, Datsun Roadsters, all that sort of stuff. So I already had that interest in those cars. And right out of high school, I went to the local Datsun dealership and pleaded with the guy to give me a job. And again, just took on as the delivery driver, picking up parts and delivering parts to body shops and whatever I could. So, and it was a chance for me, by that point I had a Datsun truck and then a 510 and then a 240Z. So it kind of gave me that opportunity to get the parts at a discount and, use those for autocross back then, slalom racing. Back then it was called slalom racing. We would go to, various parking lots and set up cones and do slalom racing through the Datsun 240Z Club and those sorts of things. So, I wanted to do that before I turned 21, so that when I turned 21, I could go to school, get my driver's license, racing license, and then start racing. And literally the day I turned 21, I went to Bob Bondurant School, and so I could start to work on my license.
That's great. That was a great lead in too, because that's exactly where I wanted to go next was, you made the sandwiches, you were hanging out at the track, you were helping. So at 21, you went and got your license.
Yep.
How'd that school go? Was it easy? You got the license and then went racing? Was it harder than you thought?
Yeah. So, there were two things you could, I actually went to SCCA school as well. That was just that driver's weekend. A guy named Danny McKeever was my first instructor, who was pretty well known out here in Southern California. And, Danny and I hit it off pretty well. He knew my brother-in-law, so that didn't hurt any. But I would do track days at Willow Springs on my own, which was really stupid because I would drive an MG out to Willow Springs, street tires, everything, go race around the track and then drive the car home. And anything that happened to that car, I would have been dead. But I would do those sorts of things. I would, whether it was a 510 or whatever, would drive out to the track. So got a chance to get some track time. Went to school, did fairly well at that. And then for your second deal, you could either do it through SECA or at that time you could do it through Bob Bondurant. And I was lucky enough to actually have Bob Bondurant as my teacher. And so did that. That was a 3-day course. I think it was about $2,000 back then. It was pretty expensive. But did that, and he signed off on my license. It started regional racing and then national racing and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And you did some Formula Continental and
He did.
Did you ever do any production car racing?
Yeah, I actually started off in the Datsun 510. Actually, before that, I did a Datsun Roadster and then 2-liter Roadster and then a Datsun 510. Did a little bit in a 240Z and then moved to Formula Continental and then back then Formula B, which is Atlantic today. Mm-hmm. So, and then at some point I kind of ran out of money and talent.
Yeah. When you start moving up the levels like you did, you're right. Now the playing field just gets bigger and bigger and more competitive and certainly more expensive. Yeah,
I ran against Steve Saline and some of those guys, and did okay at the regional level and even a little bit. I'd be a 3rd, 4th, 5th place at the national level, but. But the other thing I noticed was, I really loved it. My number was 27 because I thought by 27 I'd be at Indy. And of course that didn't pan out. But got to hang out with guys like Dennis Firestone, who was he was a club racer with us and he made it to Indy. And I saw how hard it was for him, very talented at the club level, but moving up to that IndyCar level was really tough. And, but I saw those guys. I also saw a lot of guys that were, by this time I'm 26, 27, working, trying to figure out a career in my life. And then, but I would see guys 33, 34, 35, and even older still living at home, trying to make it. And there's, like anything, right? There's just so much talent out there. And you got to have seat time, you got to have money, and you got to have talent. And I think I probably realized that as much as I loved it, I had to make a living. I had to make a career. I knew it was important for me. At that point, I was starting to settle down. I had married my wife at 27, and you start to get other responsibilities. And as much as I loved racing and knew I would continue on at the sport club level, also knew that to make it up to Indy was probably, while it was a great dream, didn't think I'd make it. And so kind of went the business route at that point. But still did some club work. It was really funny because when I was racing in SECA, I would see older guys that were out there just for the sport. And I thought, why would you do that? If you're not there to be the winner and be the killer and to be the guy that's going to go, endurance racing or, why would you just come out here and have fun? Right, and then as I got older, I was like, okay, I guess I could be a mid-pack guy and, still go out and have fun knowing that, I don't have the time and the effort and even the budget or talent to be a top runner. But it took that maturity level to learn that. But, I learned so much through, working on race cars and prepping and not being prepared and all that. I think it helped me in business and in life quite a bit. And even just taking care of your tools and being organized and all of that was great discipline for me because like all of us, you kind of learn that you forgot to tighten something or, you get out on the track and you hear a tool drop on the ground and, all those sorts of things. So, and then even running a team, even trying to, I had some friends that were pit crew. So you kind of learn to, you have to speak up a lot more. You have to understand all those things. So it was, I'd do it all the same way again. It was great learning lessons for me and a great, life balance. And now I get to watch my kids do the same thing.
Yeah. Do you get an opportunity to get on track anymore? I know you got the 400Z. Does that get any track time? Yeah,
that doesn't. We've got yes, I do once in a while, not as much as I'd love to. We have a Radical, and I'm slow. I mentioned I've got 3 wonderful kids. My 2 sons are involved in racing, and we'll go out and do track days, and they can beat me by, gosh, I hate to admit this, they can beat me by 4, 5, 6 seconds a lap now, and in the Radicals. But, we'll go out and do that. We've got a few kind of fun cars like that. My youngest son has an Ariel Atom, so we'll take that out and flog it around a little bit as well. And then, just every once in a while I'll get a chance to go out. I actually had a Datsun 240Z vintage car up to about a year ago. Oh. And took that out and kind of flogged that. What was funny about it was that car felt so fast to me, and so what a great handling car in the 70s and 80s. And man, by today's standards, it's pretty slow and
right.
No ground effects, none of that. And you realize how much technology has moved along.
Yeah. Did you enjoy the vintage racing scene?
I did. I didn't actually race in vintage, but I went out and did track days.
Okay.
And so, I keep saying I'll get back to it. I wish I had more time. This job keeps me pretty busy, and always trying to balance family time and work time, and the job does give me the opportunity to get out to see races, to go to Long Beach Grand Prix or a Formula One race or a NASCAR race, or so I'll get it out to do those sort of things from a spectator standpoint. It does still make me smile, and it does make me want to jump into the car. But I think my competitive days are over for sure.
Well, as long as you still get those opportunities to go do a few laps, put a few smiles on, that's, and you get so many other ways that you get to, be close to our sport. Yep. With your background in racing, how has that helped you in your role at SEMA?
Yeah, I think, probably 2 things. The background in racing, and then I came from private business. So I was a SEMA member. I was a manufacturer. I bought and sold 5 companies over the years and ran different companies. So the probably the combination of being in the trenches, manufacturing parts, taking them to market, going through distribution, growing companies, those sorts of things, understanding the nuts and bolts of the market in both the SEMA and PRI world were definitely great experiences for me, along with just that racing world and seeing friends, knowing friends, and still see some of those friends today. I mean, I just had breakfast with Paul Fanner, who Paul and I raced in the 70s together. And so you still have those lifelong friends. Steve Saline just called me yesterday. So, having those lifelong friends, but that part of the industry. So between business and between racing and understanding those markets and coming from that world has really given me great experience to better understand our customers, our members, the industry in itself, right? We get 160,000 people that come to the SEMA show that are all in this industry. We get 45,000 people that come to the PRI show that are all in the racing industry. So my ability to connect with them, talk to them, ask them what they're struggling with, and then seeing where we can find solutions to help the industry really has allowed me to speak the speak and walk the walk, I guess.
Yeah. One more question as it relates to racing and SEMA/PRI, and then we're going to get into more of the deeper stuff on SEMA. So one of the things I always like to talk about is as folks are moving along their motorsports journey, they could be somebody that's sitting on the couch now and wants to go do their first autocross or track day or whatever. Since you know everything SEMA, everything PRI, if you had to give someone some advice on where to start to learn, what resources, it could be a member company, it could be something SEMA or PRI offers, any advice on where they could start to research getting on track and getting involved in motorsports?
Yeah, I think probably, especially from a grassroots side, and again, it depends on what kind of motorsport they want to do. There's obviously local drag tracks, tracks still open. There's Thursday night racing. Learn your skills with your street car there if you like. And then, Formula Drift is a big thing now for young kids. And, there's schools out here that you can learn Formula Drift. And, I'm obviously a big proponent of not racing on the street, but taking the car to the track. And then through SCCA, there's a lot of great opportunities now. At 18 years old, you can get out and do a bunch of just amateur racing in slalom course, time trial, that sort of thing. So, I think everybody feels like you really learn quick. You think you're a pretty good driver, and you do some video game stuff. Now, again, today, the video game stuff's pretty real. We have a simulator at the house, and my sons will simulate, and my grandson now will simulate a lot, and I think it does help them. I think there's definitely some real that out. I don't know if I was a big fan of that in the beginning, but you can literally dial in any track now, and some of these simulators will vibrate, and you get steering input and those sort of things. So, I do think that is a way now that you can get started, and then getting out to that track. But it really is fun to see how everybody thinks they're the greatest driver, and then they get out and cook the brakes and get out in the dirt and miss the rumble strip and do all those sort of things. So it's all about seat time, as we all know. And I think all those sorts of things. So I think all those sort of grassroots racing. I'm a big grassroots racing fan. As much as I love the pro sports, the ability to get out with your buddies, to get out and build a car and test it, and of course, having the safety gear and all those sort of things, that's number one. It's great for our industry, right? Because we sell all those products and those parts, but it really is the opportunity to enjoy the sport.
Yeah, and the paddock is filled with such awesome people. I don't care if you're at a 5th mile dirt track, or you're at a drag strip, you're at a big track, or you're just at Nelson Ledges Road Course in Garrettsville, Ohio. That paddock is filled with people that want to grow the sport. They want to help one another. They're willing to lend you a wrench or a part to make sure that you stay on track. And I think as soon as someone understands that and they feel it and they see it, they're hooked on grassroots racing.
Absolutely. When years ago, I would take my kids to the races, and there was at a particular race we were at, and the driver allowed my kids to sit in the car. And I've got pictures of it, but they would talk about that forever. And it really was touching to me. We were at Orange Show last week, my two boys run Legends. And right after the race, happened to be the last race of the night where they let the crowd into the pits. And both my boys had doors open, and they were letting 5-year-old, 6-year-old kids sit in the car. And I went to use the restroom and then went over to the snack stand, and I came back, and it was really fun for me to see that they now pass that on to strangers, to let them sit in the race car and talk to them and take pictures with them, those sorts of things.
Yeah. When you let someone sit in your car, whether it's at a car show, race night, wherever, that is a memory a child will have forever. Doesn't mean that they might end up in motorsports, but they're going to remember that cool experience, how welcoming somebody was, and that goes a long way.
Yeah, and we have this thing here, even at SEMA and PRI, where we love the ability to find people that are car curious and turn them into, car people. And so that's one of our mottos around here, is to take the car curious. And really, we do that through the SEMA show and through a consumer show that we do on Friday and SEMA Fest that we do on Friday night. But really get those people to become fans, and whether they buy a 30-year-old, car and start to work on it, or start to build that car for the track. But it's leading in that next group of consumers. If you think about even this industry, we're a $337 billion economic impact industry annually. But we got to continue to have that opportunity to bring new people into it. And we're really fighting for discretionary money, right? So they could go buy golf clubs, or they could go buy an intake manifold. And we prefer they bought the intake manifold.
Yes. So that's a great segue into what SEMA is working on. And let's just jump right in to legislation. And there's a lot of stuff at the federal level with emissions and the EPA. There's state bills. I know you've successfully fought 2 of them. So what is SEMA focused on in terms of the legislative landscape right now?
Yeah, so lots of things, both at the federal level and at the state level. And it was one of the things, I took this job over as CEO. I came on to SEMA to create the SEMA Garage. I'd sold my last company and came on to SEMA to develop the SEMA Garage, which is a product development center, on a 3-year contract. And I'm now 12 years into my 3-year contract. But so the one area that I was probably least comfortable with coming into the CEO job was the government ledge reg. I just, while I vote, my local voting, I wasn't really involved in politics. And so I got thrown into the deep end in it. And now there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not doing something in the ledge reg side of the industry. And and you do have to be active. And we do have to, as an industry and as enthusiasts, have to have our voice heard. So we decided to really invest in the ledge reg area, because there were a lot of laws coming out against us, and we were getting run over. So we took the team in DC from 5 people up to 14, and brought a woman in named Karen Bailey, who is just amazing, comes from an industry of being able to fight for your rights and those sorts of things. So we are now very active politically, and again, at both the state and federal level. At the Fed level, we were, and some of this was actually even state by state, we were against EV mandates. And it's not that we don't think EVs are cool. They're great. They're a great opportunity and great technology. We just don't think that the government should put their thumb on the scale and say you're going to drive an EV and EV only. If it fits your needs and it fits what you want and it fits your lifestyle, great, but it shouldn't be mandated. And so we've been really active in all that. The work that President Trump signed against EV mandates was our wording exactly. And so we were able to work on that. We're currently working in California on a Congressional Review Act, a CRA, which is seldom used, but it's to overturn the EV mandates in California. And so if we're successful there, that will affect 14 other states. And again, I think there's so many technologies out there right now that should continue. Look, America was built on innovation. And to say that there's only one technology that you can innovate, we think is wrong. I mean, there's opportunity in hydrogen. Look, Formula One's looking at V10 engines on alternative fuels, including hydrogen. So there's hydrogen, there's obviously hybrids, there's low carbon fuels now, there's synthetic fuels, there's all these things that we really believe can continue. We're all for clean air. We just think there's a lot of ways to get there. And depending on your driving needs, you should be able to pick the vehicle you want. So we're really active there. And then at the state level, there's stuff that pops up all the time. Mm-hmm. Recently in Oregon, there was a bill to eliminate leaded fuels at racetracks. And we were successful at beating that down. Currently here in California for the street, we're working with Jay Leno on Leno's Law, which is right now, if you have a car 76 or later, it has to go through emissions testing every 2 years. And so we're trying to get that. Other states are a rolling 25 years. We're trying to get it to a rolling 35 years. And part of the problem is that here in California, look, if it doesn't have an OBD2 port, you have to go find an emissions station that's got a dyno in it. And those are tough to find now. Those emission stations don't all have that equipment. Mm-hmm. The equipment's not being made anymore for those sort of stations. And so if you do find a station and you have to drive 60 miles to go find that station, they can charge you more. And we're talking about, vintage vehicles, right? We're talking about older cars, 1976, that aren't typically driven every day anyway. So you could put 60 miles, 120 miles round trip just to find the emission station. And so we believe that it should be a rolling 35 years, and we're making our way through that process right now.
Okay. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into, advocating, for good legislation or the repeal of legislation. And there's a lot of folks that are meeting with, elected officials and things like that. But what can the grassroots racer do to make sure that they are supporting things that SEMA is getting behind? How does that average racer, let's just call it a consumer, how do they get involved and how do they advocate to help your efforts?
Yeah, so you can go to SEMA.org, SEMA.org, and learn there. We also have SEMA SAN, S-A-N, and that's a grassroots organization that we have that we send out newsletters, and we'll say things along the line of, again, it may be at the state level of, hey, in Alabama, they're trying to shut down this racetrack, and it's for these reasons, and it doesn't have anything to do with somebody trying to sell the property. It's for other reasons. And we want you to be able to write letters to your local congressman or senator. Typically, we have a link there, so it makes it really easy, where it's just click this link and put in your zip code, and it'll tell you your local legislator. And we want to make sure you're understanding that, we're against this or we're for this or whatever it might be. So it really is going to take, we're working really hard to work with all the different associations, all the trade organizations, all the different racing groups to build bridges, because we have to have a voice. I mean, we've seen too many things get shut down. And there's stuff that, sometimes we don't know about it in the beginning. And the best way to learn about it can be from a local racer or a local enthusiast that says, hey, did you guys know that this is going on? And we'll dig into it like, okay, as much as there are so many rules and so many laws that come up. We have this team that just scours new potential introductions of laws every single day, but it's impossible to catch them all. So, right. And especially at the local grassroots level, it can be difficult. And we need those enthusiasts to be our voice.
Yeah, so I want to remind the listeners, $337 billion industry, right? So when we have tracks closed, we have restrictions made, those are jobs. That's tax revenue for local communities or states. It could be a really big impact if nobody speaks up for all of this.
So I just met the guys that bought Willow Springs Raceway, and I'm really excited to hear that they're going to keep it open, and they're going to keep it open for racing. It's not going to be a housing development. And we need people like that. For us now again, my kids' circle track race, we are down to Orange Speedway out in Riverside, or we have to go to Bakersfield, which is a couple-hour drive. So the ability to keep racetracks open, really important. And let's face it, if there aren't racetracks open, people are going to race on the streets. Young kids are going to race on the streets. Yeah. And so, that's not good. That's not good for any of us. It's not good for the sport.
All right, Mike, let's go ahead and let's talk about the shows. We're going to start with SEMA, which is this little car event you have out in Las Vegas, right?
Yeah, it's
takes up just a little bit of footage in the convention center. For someone that doesn't know, what is SEMA?
So SEMA, of course, is it's this whole trade organization, all those things we just talked about. But the SEMA show is what everybody knows. And it's really funny because when I talk to people they say, what do you do? And I said, I work for SEMA. They say, oh, so do you live in Las Vegas? Because that's the only thing they know, right? And it's 4 days a year where we do this amazing trade show. But we just talked about all those other things we do during the year. But so the show itself is obviously the crown jewel. It is the largest automotive trade show in the United States. Obviously the largest show in Las Vegas. It's bigger than CES and some of these other shows that are out there. It is 4 days of just pure car everything. From lowriders to lifted trucks to tuner cars, Japanese cars, muscle cars, crazy builds. It is a business-to-business show, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It is now open to the public on Friday. You can buy that's new for us, but you can buy a ticket to the show. And then Friday night we have SEMA Fest, which is more cars, more crazy stuff, Nitro Circus, and rock bands. So it is, it's again, a business-to-business show. It covers 3 million square feet, believe it or not. It's 1.2 million square feet of trade show booths. 2,500 manufacturers show up with their booths, with showing up all the newest products and different things they have to sell, from guys with valve springs to, superchargers. So just about everything in between, suspension components. If you're a manufacturer in this industry, it's almost mandatory you have to be at the SEMA show. And then all the buyers that come along with it. So it is really a chance to celebrate the industry, to do business, to learn about the newest products. We do almost 100 educational seminars. Speakers show up. Race car. Mario Andretti shows up every single year. Mm-hmm. Lots of other TV stars and rock stars, and if they can get into the show, they come to the show.
Yeah, it's a who's who of the industry. The builds, I've gone to 3 SEMA shows, and I can't wait to get to the next show, 2025. The builds are off the hook. I can't believe. So on the outside of the SEMA show, you've got these huge lifted trucks. Yep. And I'm not a tall man. I'm 5'4". I can walk underneath these things, but they are the shiniest vehicles you've ever seen. The attention to detail inside the show is off the hook as well, because you've got, people that they have products and services, and they're doing this for the industry, they're doing that for the industry. You want to do anything or sell to people in this industry, it's where it's at. And I got to tell you, I always say, if you're not learning, you're dying. Basically, you're not growing, you're dying. Those seminars and workshops that are put on are awesome. Yeah. I love taking the business ones. You got Dan Kahn giving, marketing updates and what's happening in the digital landscape. You walk away with so much information, so many great relationships. You see a lot of cool stuff. You're around a lot of cool people, and I'm so excited that there's now the B2C on Friday crowd. What led to that?
It is a couple of things. SEMA's done what it's done forever, but it's probably the biggest, most desirable car show that nobody could get to, and we, even to expand just our brand and the ability to connect with more and more people, the ability to connect with consumers. Again, we all have to band together in this ledger reg stuff, and so the opportunity to connect with those people, the opportunity to get car curious people, or even consumers who are already fans and are involved from a hobby. Those are the influencers. If you think about it, it's the person that works on his car on the weekends and is a hobbyist and maybe takes it to a car show or takes it out to a racetrack. Even though they're not in our industry, they could be anything, right? They could work anywhere, electrician, whatever it might be, but they really are influencers because they love the sport, they love the hobby, they love all that. And when they are working on their car or talking to anybody else, they become the influencers. They become the people that say, hey, you know what? Yes, if you would need this part, go to Summit Racing or you should be buying a Edelbrock manifold or whatever it might be, right? Suspension pieces. So allowing that consumer in and allowing them to come to the show and allowing them to see the products as a consumer and as a buyer of those products. And then again, the ability for them to just grassroots talk to everybody else about their products and what they know. And they become kind of the local expert, the neighborhood expert. And so we want to feed that.
Great. So 2 more questions on the SEMA show. What is your pro tip for someone that's lucky enough to attend? What's your pro tip for attending the show? If
you're coming for more than a day, bring good shoes. It is, again, to try to walk it all. If you walk every aisle, it's 32 miles. And it's amazing. I walk, when I'm there, I typically walk about 11 miles a day. So that seems to be the norm around the number that is around. So bring plenty of water, walk. You really have to plan because you're not going to see everything. If you come Friday as a consumer, you're not going to get to see everything. I think we worked it out, and if you got to see every booth, you have less than a minute in every single booth. So you have to decide what, and it's broken down by halls, right? So there's a wheel and tire hall, there's a truck hall, there's a performance hall, there's other accessory halls. So kind of understand, look at the map ahead of time, and know what you want to do, plan for it, eat good, prepare to walk a lot.
For sure. Any funny stories from the SEMA show? Some oddity you had to deal with or something your team brought to you? Like, we really got to talk about this.
Yeah, there's so many. There's so many. The one that comes to mind immediately is I guess I can tell the story. I get a chance to walk around with some pretty cool folks, and I got to walk around with Richard Petty once, and more than once. But he and I was trying to get him from one hall to another, and we were kind of walking through the crowd, and I'll say a voluptuous woman dropped something and bent down to pick it up, and picked it up and just kind of smiled. And Richard and I walked by, and he took his glasses off for a second. He goes, "Son, I think she did that for you and me." And just the way he said it was like I was trying to be very professional about everything and trying to get him through this crowd. And it was just one of those moments I'll always remember that we just had to laugh about it.
Oh, man, that's a great story. All right, let's shift gears and go over to Indianapolis from Las Vegas for the PRI show, performance racing industry. This is where business gets done. I think that might even be one of your taglines, right? Yep. For the show. For those that don't know, what is the PRI show that happens every December in Indianapolis? Yep.
So this year it's going to be December 11th through 13th. It's right downtown Indianapolis at the convention center, and it is a pure racing show. So while the SEMA show has racing, and it has custom car, and it has lifted trucks, and it has lowriders, and it has really everything automotive, the PRI show is hardcore racing. It is all the, most of those components aren't legal for the street. I mean, we're talking about real hardcore racing. We're talking about sprint cars and drag cars and all of the, you're going to mention anything to do with racing. So very hardcore racing, very hardcore products, about 45,000 people, again, business to business. And we just celebrate, and we do it in December because that's the off time for racing. And while it's cold in Indianapolis and all those sorts of things, it gives the racers a chance to plan for the following year. And again, to see the products and the newest things and talk to the manufacturers directly about some of their product needs and what's going on. And then again, just to celebrate everything racing, we do seminars and lots of drivers show up. It's just fun to see, your favorite driver walking the aisles and looking at products. So, Tony Stewart shows up every year, and just, it's fun to see him and he's there to learn. He's there to talk to manufacturers. He's there to talk to different people in the racing industry to see what's going on.
Yeah, it really is a neat trade show because just like you're saying, you could walk down and you want to talk to someone about how does this standalone ECU work, because you could call a tech line, but if you have the opportunity to talk to, a lot of times they have salespeople and engineers in the booth. Hey, here's my build. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here's, they'll walk you through it.
Right.
And you can start to connect all those dots together at one show. Now you're over talking to somebody else about an engine component, maybe somebody else about a fuel cell and fuel pump that's going to go along with that standalone ECU. So it really is, where business gets done. And Atomic Autosports, which is our business, we're a business member. So I love the business lounge.
Yep.
It makes me look like a rock star because I'll tell someone, hey, thank you. But I'll tell someone, hey, we need to have a meeting. We're going to meet in the business lounge. And then they're like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. A lot of great conversations, and the staff is always so awesome. I joked with you before we hit record that I can't wait till I can book the rooms. Right, as soon as the rooms are open, boom, we're booking. Put those dates on the calendar. So, is that too where it's only business to business, or can the average Joe come in as well?
Yeah, it's only business to business. I will tell you that we will be announcing soon a really special opportunity through anybody that's a member of SCCA. So as a weekend racer, if you're an SCCA member, we're going to have an opportunity to have you come to the show. So that does kind of stretch us a little bit more into the enthusiast or the weekend warrior sort of guy, where in the past it's been hardcore racer guys only. So while there's some really serious SCCA racers, there's also kind of the weekend warrior guy that is now going to get to come to the PRI show. So look for that news to come out here soon at PRI.com and through SCCA.
All right. So I have 3 more questions, Mike.
Sure.
The first is there anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about?
We could go on for hours, but I think we covered a lot. I was really happy to have this conversation. We could bench race. When we get to the PRI show this year, I'm going to go in the business lounge, and you and I are going to bench race some. How's that?
Let's do it. Yeah. Okay. Last 2 more questions now. So folks want to learn more. You already said PRI.com. I think it's SEMA.org. Those are the 2 great places to go and learn. Anywhere else?
Yeah, again, SAN.com is our SEMA Action Network group. And that's something that you can learn a lot from. We do have newsletters. We do have a lot of things kind of from a reg standpoint where you can learn about what's going on and be active to keep this hobby alive, to keep this sport alive.
Awesome. We're going to put links to all those in the show notes. So the final question, I need you to think back to those racing days.
Yes.
Were you ever late to grid?
I don't think so. In fact, I couldn't wait to get to grid. Now maybe I didn't always have, all the proper equipment on, but I couldn't wait to get grid. It gave me, if I was late to grid, it would make me nervous, and I needed that time. I was there before, when the race before me was starting, I was already on the grid, and it just gave me that chance to calm myself, kind of walk through in my mind what I wanted, to think about, kind of thinking about, okay, you blew this corner, this is the right way to do it, and just mentally get prepared. And so I don't remember a time being late to grid. I really don't.
That's good. Well, Mike, it was great having you on the podcast, you sharing a little bit more about SEMA, PRI, and certainly your motorsports background.
It was great to be with you. It really is. This is one of those ones, again, we could talk racing and that kind of stuff all day long. So happy to do it.